Hello, my name is Matthew Marquardt, and I'm here today to give you guys a little bit of a taste of Algorithmic's program Substance Painter. I'm also going to dabble in Substance Designer in a second and show you why that's important in the workflow of Substance Painter. But this particular version is Substance Painter 1.4.1, so if you're using an older or newer version, you might not actually have some of the same features or even have some newer features. The point of Substance Painter is actually to create textures on geometry super fast. As we can see here on this particular model of an axe that I have here, I've got some kind of a wood handle, some metal kind of rune-like things on it, and a bloody blade with a little bit of wear, and even some welding marks on the actual rune part up there on the blade. All kind of great PBR textures and such. The thing was, I actually did all of these textures really quickly. Didn't know exactly what I was going to put on it. Whatever, just kind of fooled around with some settings and legitimately finished it in under 20 minutes. Now, you can actually do the same thing if you knew what you were doing, probably in under 10 or even 5 minutes. That's how fast this program speeds up the process of texturing. But what I want to do now actually is to jump straight into Substance Designer, and I'm going to minimize this here. And here's our Substance Designer 5.1.1. The only reason why I'm actually going to use this is to bake out some of the textures using the low and high poly meshes of the axe that I have here on the side. Now, I found this particular axe online. It only had a high poly version that was appropriate, so I created a low poly version and retopologized that, right? And then unwrapped it so that I can use this for the demo. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go up to the top where it says File and go New Substance. We're going to do the default metallic PBR, metallic roughness, okay, 2K maps, and hit OK. We'll get this this part that kind of loads up. We're not really going to do anything with this. The real main point of Substance Designer is actually to create substances or materials for Substance Painter. The great thing about these is they're node-based, so you don't really need to know programming to create these complex shaders. And you have all sorts of options over here on the side. I'm not going to get into any of this stuff. But the other great thing about them is they're procedural based. You can use photographs too, but in general they're procedural based, so they're really low footprint, really low memory on size, and they're adjustable. So if you move sliders, you can add rust or wear or remove paint on a wall and things like that, just with a little bit of slider to get all this variation to create quick and easy AAA content. So what I'm going to do is grab this low and high version FBXs that I exported out from Max and drag them onto the unsaved package. I will load them up into the program here. Obviously that didn't work. I must have pulled it up onto new graph. You see it loads up here in resources. So we have a low version and a high version. So if I actually double click, it'll take a second, a little bit of rendering issue right there. But here's our high poly version of the axe, and if I double click, here's the low poly version of the axe. Okay, so if I just right click on the low poly version of the axe and go to bake model information, I'll bring up this output here, and you can see that I already have some maps assigned. So I've done this before, it remembers it, and I did a normal map, ambient occlusion, world space, and curvature. You can actually add or take away them from here. If you click on this, you can have all these other options to add. Now you'll also notice that there are some warning signs next to my normal map and ambient occlusion, because as I said before, it remembers it from the last time, but it doesn't know where the high poly mesh is because I actually moved it. I'm going to shut it off over here. This is where you put it, the high definition meshes. I'm going to shut that off and hit plus. We're going to choose from resource, so one of these open folders here. We're going to choose the high poly. We're going to hit OK. So now you can see those are fixed. Everything else I'm just going to leave the same default, no big deal. I'm actually just saving to the desktop, so we'll see all that stuff saved over here. So I'll hit OK, and you'll see it load up. Give it a second, but you'll actually see just how fast this program is compared to things like 3D Studio Max if you're baking out your normals and so on and so forth. So it's already baked out the normals. And you'll see the other three maps just boom, there they go, they all popped in. If I double click any of these, you can see our normal maps are ambient occlusion, world space, and curvature. Okay, but that's all we need this program for, so I'm actually just going to shut it off now. I'm not going to save anything. Now I'm going to click on Substance Painter, and we're going to start a new file here. Now I had saved this particular file before. If you save files, you can actually come in here and save them. They save as SPP files, and then you can open up Layer. That saves the whole project and all the textures and so on and so forth on it. But in this case, I'm just going to make a new one and bring in some models. So I'll hit New. And in this dialog box, we can choose the mesh that we want to start with. So I'll click right here where it says Select, and we're going to choose the Axe Low. Hit Open. I'm going to change the default size to 2K textures, and right here you can choose any particular maps that you've baked or added already. And since we just baked some, I'll hit Add, and I'll choose these 4 maps that I just baked out and hit Open. From here, I'll just hit OK, and it'll load everything up. So here we go. Here's our low poly mesh. To kind of navigate in 3D space, you can use the mouse wheel, scroll in and out here. If you hold down Alt and left click, you can spin around look. Alt and middle mouse button to pan, and Alt and right mouse button to smoothly dolly. Does the same thing as the middle mouse wheel, but just doesn't pop. Okay. As you can see, we have kind of this cool little background going on here. You can actually change those backgrounds as environment maps, and it changes the lighting. You can change it over here. Right now it's set to panorama by default. I'm actually going to change it to this scene right here, which is actually a beach. It kind of looks pretty cool. All right. Though it's not overly important that you have this. But you kind of play around with that, and if you really don't want a background, you can always drop the opacity or choose one of the other backgrounds that they have here. You can even do a lower opacity. I tend to like to drop the opacity of the environment so it's not distracting, but it keeps the lighting. Now there are some post effects you can do to the scene, but I find these fairly useless. They look cool, but it doesn't matter what they look like in Substance Painter. It only matters what it looks like in the game engine of choice when you're eventually done, so I don't usually fool around with them personally. Okay, so now we're going to assign those maps that I brought in. We'll see right up here that we have our texture set, and we have the base color, height, roughness, metallic, and so on. So I'm going to grab the maps that we just made. We'll click on Select Normal, and we'll choose the normal map here. And then we'll do Select World Space, and we'll select World Space. Ambient Occlusion, of course, choose Ambient Occlusion, and last Curvature. And if you're not sure what a map is, you hold your mouse over it for a second. It'll show you a thumbnail and give you the name. In this case, Axe Low Curvature. So you know this is the curvature map. Okay, so now it's loaded up all of those maps to the geometry, so it looks a lot cooler now, higher poly with that effect. Okay, and what we're going to do is now we're going to go into the bread and butter, of course, of Substance Painter. First thing we'll notice over here on the side with our texture set, okay, we have an axe blade, handle, runes, and stem. These are kind of the things that I named. Now this isn't actually parts of the geometry. This is the materials that I added to the object before I exported it out of 3D Max or whatever 3D program you do. And I named them axe blade, handle, runes, and stem. So it's great because it actually separates it by materials. So you can assign certain materials and turn them on and off really quickly. Now over here where it shows layers, right here by default set to base color, but you can choose to paint directly on a height map, a roughness map, or a metallic map. We're just going to leave it on base color for now. But what we want to do is make the blade part. So of course the blade is going to be metal. So by default, I'm actually going to delete this layer here. Layers, unless you're painting some details on them, they're a little bit more useless. You tend to use actually fill layers a lot more. So I'm going to delete this normal layer. You can actually add normal layers by hitting that plus sign there, but we'll delete it. But we want to use what is known as a fill layer, which is this little paint bucket here. So I'll click on the fill layer. By default, there's nothing, but if we click on any of these objects here, it will cover the geometry with that particular texture. Now, of course, this makes no sense, so I'm not going to use this particular one. I'm actually going to use titanium, was the one that I decided to use for this. It's a little bit of a beat up metal. We can kind of zoom up in here as a couple of imperfections. Okay, but doesn't have like this perfect mirror shine. There's some of them that you can do that have more of a mirror shine and so on. Okay, but I'm just going to use the default right here, titanium. Now, of course, we don't want it to look so perfect, right? We want to add some extra details to that. So how we're going to do that is actually add another fill layer. In this case, I'm going to choose metal dumpster, which if we take a look at this particular material, it looks a little beat up. All right, and has some rust on it, whatever. And you can actually change some of these settings down here when we add our fills. So we'll see that we can actually click on the random, and it'll change kind of some of the settings. Don't click it too much. As you can see here, it's still kind of thinking. If I click it too many times, it will think and kind of slow my performance down. Depends on your computer, but we'll leave it where it's at. Now you can even change the color here. These options change based on what material you're using or substance you're using. In this case, I'm just going to leave all these fairly default. Okay, so we want to take some of this wear and tear and put it down into this metal here. But we don't necessarily, I mean, of course, if we're in Photoshop, we can use mask and we can paint it out where we decide to paint it out using brushes. As we can see down here, we have brushes and things like that. But even a quicker way is to use a generator within Substance Painter. So on this particular fill layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a alpha mask, which is this little circle right here. We'll click on mask. You can add a white or a black mask. In our case, it doesn't matter. But I'll add a black mask so it makes it completely invisible. And just like in Photoshop, black hides, white reveals. Okay, so since it's all black, we don't see anything. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm actually going to add the generator. And that's this little button up here. We can add a couple different things. We'll just add generator. And since I've done this before, I already know what I want to pick, but there's a bunch of different kind of settings that can grime up your map. In this case, I'm actually going to use what is known as MG Leaks. Okay, and at first it doesn't look like it's doing much, and this is kind of why it's important, by the way, to have those other maps baked out, because these generators use your curvature and your ambient occlusion maps. As you can see, they're automatically assigned down here, so you need to use them. So as I said, by default it doesn't do much. In fact, if I turn it on and off, you'll see barely a difference. Okay, but I kind of played around with the settings a little bit. Okay, and I'm actually going to change the settings to what I had previously. As I move some of these things up. And one of the things is right here, I'm actually increasing the levels. Okay, we want to make sure that we're using the mask properly and so on. So I'm going to move the levels up here. Okay, I'm actually going to drop the variation down on this particular piece, and you'll see that suddenly now I'm getting this effect that I was hoping for here, where we're getting some wear and tear on certain parts of the geometry. Okay, it's thinking, you see a little bar down there. Okay, but on the edges, it's still a little bit shiny because, let's just say, if they were using this for a long time, you know, you'd get wear and tear in here, but of course they'll keep sharpening the blade on the edge. So I'm actually going to drop variation down all the way to 0. Actually, I found that that was the kind of the effect that I wanted. Okay, it's kind of thinking a little bit. There we go. All right, and just increase levels up a little bit more, so it'll just get a little bit darker. But you can see that it kind of just hones in on the edges of the geometry, which, as I said before, is kind of the important thing when it comes to these maps over here, such as the curvature and ambient occlusion. So it uses them to know where to add this detail. So you can see right here that I did this really fast. If you're painting in Photoshop, it wouldn't take a heck of a long time, but this is just almost instantaneous. You move the slider around and done, and it knows exactly where to place the detail. Now I'm going to show you another cool little feature. Now you can paint directly on the geometry. Okay, we can't paint on a fill layer, so if we did want to paint anything in particular on geometry, we would add a new blank layer. So we have a new blank layer here, and let's just say I wanted to paint. You can choose brushes over here on the side, and then you choose the material you want to paint. If you just want to paint a color, they have uniform colors down here. You can choose like uniform white, and if I really wanted to, I can paint white on this, and you can paint both in the 3D and the 2D view. Okay, either one works and updates in real time in the other view. Now, of course, I don't want that, and it is a layer, so we can drop the opacity just like a layer in Photoshop. Okay, and in this case, when I drop the opacity of the color, you still see some stuff going on. That's because when I painted in color, roughness, and metal all at once. If you only want to paint one thing, let's just say just add color, you would shut off the roughness, you'd shut off the metal, and so on and so forth. As you painted, it would only paint in that. So even though I'm hiding the base color, we still see a hint of something left over due to the roughness and the metallic being changed. You can actually paint just on your height, your roughness, and metallic right here. Okay, but the only point was to kind of show you this. I'm not going to use this particular brush, but you can see all sorts of brushes you can choose from. You can change the color down here, so the uniform color is white. Let's just say we wanted to add blood. We can come in here. I'm actually going to do a darker color for blood, and we can kind of paint on this. Now you can get this effect, and it might be all right, right? No super craziness. Like it doesn't necessarily look super realistic. Of course, it really doesn't look realistic with that white in there. So I'm actually going to delete this layer here. Okay, and we'll add a new layer. But I'm actually going to show you another cool tool within Substance Painter, and that's particles. Particles over here, you have a bunch of different ways of adding brushes. Okay, so with these particles, I'm actually going to choose, I believe I used heavy leaking the last time. And you can see like it updates over here on the side when you choose these different ones. It kind of shows you how it works. You shoot particles on the geometry, and based on the direction the geometry is facing, it will create these special effects, things like fracture and fill and burn and so on. And actually, now that I think about it, I think I used burn to create this effect, even though it doesn't necessarily make any sense, but I did use burn. Now if I click and hold, you'll see the particles fly onto the object, and you can kind of move them the direction you want, and you'll see that it will just add this stuff as the particles hit the geometry. It will compile kind of on those spots. Now, like I said, there's a whole bunch of other ones. Say we do like liquid stream, we could shoot a liquid stream at it, and you see it kind of shoots and kind of just forms up in the edges of things. That's probably a little overdoing it, of course. I'll undo that. But you can see right here with the burn, I actually kind of got that effect that I wanted. Okay, and kind of move it across here. It's actually still on the other one, so I got to double click to get on the burn, and undo, 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 undo. Try that again. And you can change the size of the brush to get different effects. All right, but you can kind of see right here that this kind of adds a more realistic effect. I'm not going to take the time to make it look super pretty, but you get the idea of how simple and easy that can be with these cool little particle effects. Now, the last thing I wanted to add in this particular case of the blade itself is add some weld marks right here, because they actually have a nice little metal weld that we can do. So I'm going to do another layer, okay, and this time we'll do another fill layer here. Okay, because we're going to choose a substance to kind of fill in, and we're going to scroll up until we find the metal. Where are we? Taking a little while, of course, to find this. But as I said before, we want to look for metal welding. Where are you, metal welding? If I wow, this is pretty pathetic. Here we go. Wow. Took me forever. So anyways, by default, of course, this looks pretty horrendous. This is not what we're going for, right? We don't want it to be that large, and we of course don't want it to be that direction if I'm going to have a weld mark go this way. But this is one of those substances that automatically alphas itself out. So what we need to do in order to fix this particular fill layer is we need to play with the settings. First off, I need to change the rotation. So you can manually kind of rotate it here. You can kind of type in a rotation. So I'll type in 90. Okay, and it's obviously too large also, so you can play with the scale, right, and have it repeat more. And just moving it up kind of closer to 12 or something like that actually looks pretty good. I'm going to need to rotate it just a little bit more, so I'm going to kind of randomly rotate this until it's kind of straight. Okay, and then we'll kind of play with the offset a little bit here until I get it on both sides of the rune. And if you know a particular number, right, if you're having a hard time to get it perfectly aligned, you can just type a number in. Right, so if I type in 0.25, okay, it looks pretty good. Now, of course, it is adding, the welding right here looks good on the edges here, but it looks bad in all the other spots. So all we have to do, of course, is add ourselves a mask, okay? I'm going to add in a black mask to completely hide it. I'm going to grab a brush. We'll just grab a normal default brush, okay? And we'll be on the white here, and we will just paint in on that mask and paint back in the weld marks on both sides of this object, and that's it. All right, and there you go. So now you have those quick and dirty weld marks on the side there. Now you can also change the welding. If I click on here, there are some settings you can change. So if you're like, that color's too dark, I don't want it to be that dark, we can go in and grab the color here and lighten it up a bit. As you can see, the metal kind of lightens up. Looks a little bit more appropriate for the metal it's on. All right. Shut that off. But there you go. So there's a quick and easy way to kind of do the blade. So let's do some of the other things. Let's pick on this next one. Let's do the handle. Okay, so if we click it on and off, you can kind of see the handle here. All right, on the handle itself, I actually used leather, and I chose a fill called leather bag. So I'm going to delete this layer here, and we're going to do a new fill. And remember, each one of these actually has its own set of layers. So you can see this whole section changes depending on what you have selected. So we'll do a new fill layer. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to choose leather bag. So let's find that. Where are you, leather bag? Apparently I have an incredibly hard time finding things because they're not just in alphabetical order. They break them up by different types. So here's our leather bag. All right. Kind of pop on that. It's a little too dark, and I think the detail needs to repeat a little bit more. So we can kind of change the UV scales right here. That's way too much more, way too little. So we can kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then color-wise, you can kind of, like I said, you can change around some of the colors here and change the wear. I tend to like just using the wear in this case because it kind of lightens up the look kind of a lot better with that. But the problem is it's just too consistent, so I really don't like it. So we're going to do another one of those kind of edge generators to get a cooler effect on this using this leather interior that we have over here. So I'm going to do another fill effect, boop, and we're going to come over here and we're going to add leather interior. And we're going to add our mask. You always have to add a mask if you're going to add a generator. And then add the generator here. Okay, so by default nothing is showing up. We got to choose the one that we want. In this case I'm going to choose MG Metal Edgeware. So we're going to go down, I forget where, okay, here it is, Metal Edgeware, or this one's just Edgeware. It's not updating. Metal Notch, I think. Oh, there we go, Metal Edgeware. So we'll click on this one. All right. And we're going to play with some of the settings. So I have a bunch of different settings changed in here. I'm actually going to change only a couple of them. We're going to drop down the wear contrast a little bit here. A lot of these settings I kind of left default. Edge smooth increase a little bit. Not that much, maybe something like this. Let's see here. We'll increase up this ambient masking, and the curvature weight will drop way down. Something more to this effect. And actually I think I had it, well, maybe not. Trying to remember which settings I used here. Let's go up a little bit more on this. Well, it's not exactly the effect I was going for, but you kind of get the idea. Now let me jump around to the next section, which is the runes. And the runes were also very, very simple. Same thing. I kind of just started off with a fill layer. This particular fill layer is the same metal that I used before, titanium. But in this case, I actually added some rust. So we'll do another fill layer. We'll do a mask. So we'll add a white mask here. Click on the fill layer itself, and there's actually a substance called rust, and so we can put that on there, and then we can add once again a generator by coming in here, add generator, and click on the generator and choose something. So this one's also Metal Edgeware, so I'll grab that one too, and then we need to re-add the curvature map. So we'll come right here and add the curvature and the ambient occlusion. And I actually kind of think now, let me go back and check on the handle. And that might be the reason why that was looking a little odd. Yeah, here we go. So here's our curvature and our ambient occlusion. Okay. So that's probably why it wasn't turning out the way I wanted when I was kind of moving some of those sliders around before. I had just made a mistake. There we go. Now we can get those edges in there the way that we want them. It looks a little bit better. Not perfect, but like I said, the point of this is not to make it look perfect, just to give you the idea of how this works. So we're going to click back on the runes. Obviously this is way too much rust. It looks really silly on this. So with the edgeware, we want to play around with those settings a little bit also. So let's see what we can do with this. We'll move this down. Let's try with the smoothness. I'm like trying to figure out like why is this not working appropriately. Let's try this again. I need to be on the mask and then add the generator. And let's try this again. One more time. Curvature. There we go. Oh my gosh, I'm making all sorts of mistakes here. Anyways, okay. And hopefully you guys are learning with me, because I've actually only used this program for a couple of days, and I'm just showing off the information I've learned. Okay, so now if we kind of play around with the settings, you can kind of see that we can get something going on here. I was just kind of wondering why I kept moving those sliders around. Nothing was going on. I'm not going to match these settings to what I had before. You can just kind of eyeball it and just see what you like. or whatever, but we get both a view over here and over here. But I'm not going to, like I said before, make it look perfect. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how all of this works. So the last thing we'll hit on is actually the stem, or the top part of the axe. And this one is actually using a wood texture. So I'm going to go down and grab the particular one I did was called Wood Board 1, all the way on the bottom here. And by default, almost, I mean, I think I played with the setting just a little bit, but by default, I mean, that looked pretty freaking good. And there you go. But this is just, like I said before, just kind of a hint at understanding how to use this program. But hopefully it taught you a little bit. There's a lot more going on with the program. I really didn't cover everything, but I just wanted to give you guys kind of like a quick start understanding, so you guys can kind of jump into it and kind of learn for yourselves. Anyways, hopefully, like I said, you learned something, you enjoyed the video. Thank you, and I'll see you guys later.